who is listening. What we want to do is something a little bit different. America is a hotbed of cults. What I want to do is not so much go through the individual cults. We'll do that at a future time. So in the future, I want to walk with you through, say, Christian Science, some of those religions like that. For today, though, what I want to do is show you what it is uniquely about the American experience that has led so many cults to get their start here in the United States. When I was a freshman at Luther Prep School, we went through Old Testament history, and we got to the book of Judges, and our professor made us memorize every judge in order. Then we got to the kings, and we had to memorize every king in order, both from the United Kingdom and the divided kingdom. And I got done, and I thought, this is just dumb. So later on, when I got called to FVL and I had to teach that same course, I went through and I thought, well, this is my chance to get even. I'm going to make them all memorize these things and put them in alphabetical order. Of course, I didn't do that. What I did do is what I think is most important for us to do, and that is not so much to see, okay, did Ahijah come before Azariah? Was it Jehoiakim and then Jehoiakim? You can figure out Jeroboam the first and Jeroboam the second pretty easily, I'm going to guess. You look for themes. You look for things that hold together generally. In other words, if you go to the northern kingdom, and we'll see where this is going in a second, northern kingdom, you always know three things. You know that there's never a good king, it's always idolatry, and there's no stability. Okay? You go to Judah and you say, okay, well, you have some good kings, you have a little bit of stability, and the other thing is you have something called syncretism. See, now you don't have to memorize every single king. You go, northern kingdom. If this is a guy from the northern kingdom, you know he's not a good king, you know it's all about idolatry. So what I would like to do with you is rather than go through and spend a huge amount of time going through all the different religions that there are for cults in the U.S., I want to give you the seedbed that they come from, and then number two, characteristics of these cults. That way you're going to be able to not get messed up in the, okay, well, how is this different from this? You have the overview. Once we have the overview, we can take a look at a couple of them in a little bit deeper detail. So that's my goal here. We have 2 weeks to do it. I think we should be able to do that. Now that we have the introduction in hand, why don't we say a prayer? Dear Father in heaven, we'd ask that you would bless our study today. You have told us in 1 Peter that the devil is like a roaring lion looking for people to devour. He does this on an individual basis. We see it all the time, but he also does it in groups through false doctrine. He does it through groups by raising up a charismatic leader who starts a new religion with a new means of grace that is really no means of grace. As we study the rise of cults, help us to be aware that these are things that are ongoing and they pose a very real threat. Maybe not to us, but certainly to people in this area and to our extended families. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, let's take a look. Again, sorry a little bit. Some of the transitions and stuff like that are going to be a little wooden. There's really nothing that I can do about it at this point. Okay, take about 2 minutes, come up with some of America's homegrown religions. In other words, I want you to think of maybe some religion that has its origin in the United States. Okay? Lutheranism, that's the wrong answer. That's Germany. Okay, so just think of things where you go, oh yeah, I think it started maybe in the United States. Take about 2-3 minutes, okay? Now take 2 minutes. one more minute. Okay, go ahead. Give me some examples. Mormons, Quakers, rhymes with Quakers. Shakers, yeah. Quakers and Shakers, two different things. Give me another one. Christian Science, Scientology. After a while, by the way, you will take a look, and cults tend to fall into groupings. There are cults that are really connected with science, Scientology, Christian Science. Then there are communal cults where you have a doctrine and then they all kind of get together in one spot. Keep going. Mormons, yep, Mormons. Jehovah's Witness would be another one. Christy. Yep. Amish, the Amana colonies, yes. Do you start to see, though, that all of these things, what do they share? Their origins in the United States. Now, we could go on. I have a list. It was kind of a short list here. Some of them are pretty strange. We can leave it at that. New Age cults, that was one of the things that was not put in there. But New Age cults, number of them. This one, you see, the one thing that's a little bit different with New Age cults is that they tend to borrow quite a bit from Eastern ways of thinking. The Moonies would be an example of that. What's interesting is Moonies stronger in the United States than Korea. Again, it's just that strange thing. Please, do you have one?
I don't know the names of them, but like Jim Jones.
Yes. Yep, Branch Davidians. Yep. Jim Jones, I don't remember what his religion was, what the name of it was. You always remember Purple Kool-Aid, of course, but I don't remember the religion. Okay, let's take a look here. You see those notes in front of you. I have those bullet points that are going to come up all at once. And this should start to answer the question, what is it about the United States, though, that seems to serve as such a hotbed? Okay, we move on. First of all, political freedom. The United States, you have the ability to be able to say what you want, and also the ability to have freedom of speech. So freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Can you give me some reasons why? And now what I want you to do is not only just give you information, I want you to be able to tell me, why do you think that this has an impact? And this, by the way, it's a good thing. Political freedom, is this a good thing? Yeah. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, generally a good thing? Yeah. I mean, we use it all the time. Can you give me something, though, why, when this is abused, it could lead to creating an atmosphere where a cult could grow? Please.
I would say human nature, because the Bible talks about people with itching ears want to hear certain things. So if something sounds good to someone, like their itching ears want to hear it, it's easier to get something like that going. And nobody is persecuted for any teaching that's brought forward.
Yeah, and I think, Ken, that's the great point at the end is nobody's persecuted for it. You want to say something, no matter how weird it may be, no matter how outlandish it might be, you are able to do that, and generally there is that spirit of toleration. Next one, religious freedom. I'm going to give you a couple of things here, which I think are interesting. Number one, when you have religious freedom, so many of our ancestors, mine did, if you're German, more than likely the reason that you are in the United States is because of religious persecution. the religious persecution comes kind of an interesting thing, especially for Wisconsin Synod. And that is, there was something called the Prussian Union. In Germany, the Protestants and the Catholics, two separate groups. And I'm going to simplify this a little bit for you. And there was a political leader, and he said, you know what? You cannot have two different groups. We need to have one sacrament. You have one sacrament. Everybody celebrates the same sacrament. So, you happen to live here, and you're Protestant. That's too bad. The priest is going to serve your sacrament. You happen to be Catholic, and you live here, and there's no priest. Well, then the pastor's going to serve the sacrament. And so many Germans said, well, wait a second. We don't like the fact that that political people are messing with our religious beliefs. And that was one of the big exoduses from Germany, was to say, we don't want to be part of this Prussian Union. We just don't get why it is that a king or an emperor is telling us how to celebrate the Lord's Supper. I think this also goes to tell us something that Lutherans do all the time, and it's a historical thing. We're not very politically engaged, are we? I'm not saying good. I'm not saying bad. There's certainly room for us to be more politically engaged. Part of the reason Lutheranism as a whole is not politically engaged has everything to do with our culture. The fact that many Germans, especially German Lutherans, left Germany specifically because they did not want to be all caught up in this religion-political mix. Okay. Well, what happens? Results in religious diversity, pluralism, and a spirit of toleration. Somebody once told me this, and I don't know if it's true, but it sounds true-ish. And that is, if there are 15 religions, there is no strife. If there are 2 religions, there always is. That any time that you go to a country and you see a lot of different religions, because not any one of them has dominance, they all find a way to work together. But the problem becomes when you only have 2, because then you're either for us or you are against us. I'm assuming that there are going to be some times where that's not going to follow the pattern. But I think generally it holds true. Already by 1700, there were 15 separate religions in the United States of America. You and I have grown up in a country where right from the start, by the way, that's not counting native religions. Okay, native religions, you can lump together as many tribes as there are as many religions. Think of all of the other countries. You are in that country, you are born in that country, there is one dominant religion. If you are born in Saudi Arabia, it is? Yeah, it's Islam. If you are born in Italy, it is? Yeah, Catholicism. If you are born in China, Buddhism. Yeah. Now it's kind of Confucianism, if that's a religion, kind of some question about that. Now think of how different that is for the United States. You're born in the United States, how many religions are there? I mean, now there's hundreds and hundreds, but already 300 years ago, you're born, it's the year 1700, you're looking around and you're going, I got this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Can you fight all of them? No. If you can't fight them, what do you have to learn to do? Tolerate them. Do you start to see how this impacts the formation of cults, though? Yeah, you're going, okay, well, I don't know. It sounds a little weird to me, but it's just one more. Next point. Economic opportunities. This is a big one. I'll give you 3 things here. Number 1, America has that can-do spirit. Okay, self-made individual. Can you give me some really great things about the American can-do spirit?
Innovation.
Entrepreneur. Name some of the great things. Give me, quick as you can, 5 great technological advancements that have come from America. Electricity. Telephone. Cars, automobiles. Sort of the same thing. Yeah, like a Venus flytrap and a mushroom, same thing. They both grow. Computers. Where does this come from? This comes from that creativity. There is this can-do spirit. It's a self-made individual. I can find a better way. You know what? The old way is okay, but I can find a better way of doing this. This is just a side note, but I found it pretty interesting. I read an article, it was a few years ago now, talked about Americans and not doing super well on standardized tests for science. And that we're slipping behind. It's not terrible, but it's not great. And that the nation that has the best standardized testing for science is China. Okay? And here, the author's point was this, though, is that be very careful that standardized testing doesn't become the be-all and end-all. They said that China has the best science teaching program in the world, highest test scores in the world. It said, name the last Chinese person to win a Nobel Prize in any one of the sciences. There has never been one. They said standardized testing is okay if your goal is to be really good at standardized testing. But that one thing that is uniquely American is creativity. Creativity and standardized testing, those aren't 2 peas in a pod. And that just to be careful that one of the things that is uniquely American is this idea, this can-do. I can make it better. Well, is there going to be a downside of that? Well, look at how many great inventors were lousy students. Think of how many times you look and it's like he's in his garage, what would have been his sophomore year in college. Why is he in his garage his sophomore year in college? Because he was sent home after his freshman year in college. Why? Because college wasn't his thing. Okay. Number 2, just that optimism. If you spend enough time with people from other cultures, not all of them, you just see how giddily optimistic Americans are. I do a lot of traveling. When I used to teach the international course, 30-something new international students each year. So that it's like 500 people that I've spent probably 180 hours with each one of them in class. You get a good idea. One of the things that they always know, Americans, you're always like, we can find a better way. We can do it. All we have to do is find the right way. Do you see how this starts to find the seedbed of cults? Hey, you know what? Optimism. My old religion's not working. I can find a better one. Downpaying or denial of original sin. One of the things that you will find in every cult, every single cult, without exception, is a denial of original sin. See how those go together? Okay, optimism. I can do it. I can do it myself. There's a theological impact of that. Availability of land. Religious groups can develop in isolation. I want you to think about if you're growing up in England and you want to start your own cult. Zach, you got a good idea for a cult. You're in England. It's 1428. How far away can you go from a village? Not very far. England, it's like you're not going. England's teeny. Germany's teeny. A lot of those countries over there, you think of France, which is a big one. France is not as big as Texas. I think it's half as big as Texas. Could be wrong about that. It's not bigger than Texas. I know that for sure. Yeah, smaller than Alaska. That's the whole country. In America, you want to start your own cult, what do? I'll just move over that mountain. See that Appalachians? Nobody's going to go farther than that. I will just move across that river. I will move beyond that lake, and I am going to be able to start this all by myself. Less social pressure than with Europe. Can you give me why that might be true? Why would there be less social pressure? Give me your best guess.
Well, we're so diverse as a culture, there's a little bit of everything. So who's to say what's right and what's wrong?
Yep.
Tolerance.
Tolerance. You are not judged by who your parents were or your grandparents. I'm reading about the French Revolution, and that was one of the sparks was, no matter who you were, if your parents weren't royalty, didn't matter. England too, that class system. India, obviously, the caste system. You come to America, is it possible? Is it still possible to live the American dream that you can come as an immigrant and in one generation get all the way to the top? Yeah, of course it is. It's the great blessing. There is less social pressure. You can go your own way. Next one. America is the promised land and is God's chosen. I think that's a big one. Already by 1630, there's an interesting sermon written by John Winthrop. This is the Great City on the Hill sermon. The Puritans are coming over from England, and Puritans and Pilgrims, just so you know, not exactly the same. 1630, John Winthrop, they're still on the boat. And John Winthrop is preaching this sermon. He says, you are God's chosen. This is the city on the hill. That was later on picked up by Ronald Reagan, very famously. Now it's just part of our collective consciousness. Already, by 1630, America was believing that it was the new Israel. All you have to do is read primary source material, and you see all the time Puritans are talking about that. Pilgrims are. We aren't just blessed by God, we are God's chosen. America isn't just a new land, America is the promised land. And what's interesting to me is that this does not happen in Australia. Lots of immigrants went to Australia. Australia has no history of anybody going to Australia and going, you know what? Australia is the new Israel. And the city on the hill. And Australians are God's chosen. Never underestimate the impact this has if you're growing up in a society where there's all this pluralism and you are forever told that the place you are living is the new Israel. That you are part of God's chosen people. What does that create in a person? Somebody who's not balanced, the idea of, I'm the new Messiah. Think of all of the cults. They always share one charismatic, messianic figure. Branch Davidians. Do you remember who that was? David Koresh. But you go and see again, I'm not saying that that attitudes caused this. That's why I was very careful. I think I put seed bed. It's a seed bed. There's seeds involved in that as well. But just think of over and over and over again. You are God's chosen people. How many of you have heard America referred to as God's chosen or the New Jerusalem in the last 3 years? All the time. In fact, to test this out, I ran this through the internet, and there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples in 2018 of sermons and articles that are preached where American religious leaders say we are God's chosen. Are we? God is using us, but there's only one Israel. That one Israel was in the Bible. There is no word of Scripture that later on says, hey, by the way, there's going to be this country called the United States of America. And the United States of America is going to be my new Israel. And America, this is going to be the new promised land. The old promised land was in Israel. The new promised land is in America. And yet you hear it all the time. There is only one other nation right now that I am aware of that speaks the same way in a Christian sense. And that is Russia. Vladimir Putin speaks like that all the time. I read a speech of his 2016, and he talked about the Russian soul and Russia being the heartland of God. And it was Russia's divine mission to fight off Western materialism. So there's one other nation right now that really is promoting this. This is why Vladimir Putin goes swimming in the ice water on Epiphany. He did it again this year. Did you see that picture? He's right next to the patriarch. So it's the Russian Orthodox patriarch. He's the leader of the Russian Orthodox thing. And then Vladimir Putin goes for a swim in the ice water. And it's staged every year. Why? Because Russia is political. Russia is religious. I don't know. I can't speak if that's historically been true for a long time or if this is a recent development. Please, Kurt. Yep. God was on their side. Yep. White man's. The one thing that is different, and you are right, the one thing that's different is the land was not considered the new Israel. They said, we are on God's mission. I think what's uniquely America is this is God's land. This is the new Israel. This has led to two things. We studied millennialism. I'm hoping you're starting to see, those of you who are here for the millennial Bible class, you start to see how much millennialism impacts politics all the time. Do you see it? All the time. The front of the Atlantic magazine this month talks about millennialism and the impact that it has on religion. The Atlantic is not a religious magazine. It's from the outside, and Atlantic said, the title of the article is provocative. It says, where did evangelicals go wrong? And it's written by an evangelical and said, somewhere along the way we got so caught up in politics that we are beginning to lose our souls. By the way, we are not evangelicals. We talked about this at Circuit. Sometimes in people's minds, conservative Christianity and evangelicals are the same. That's not true. It is not true. Evangelicals, always millennialists. You cannot be an evangelical unless you are a millennialist. You can be conservative and still, yes, you can be a conservative and not be a millennialist. Millennialism, two forms, pre and post, doesn't really matter for us. The other part that's interesting, though, is this utopianism. There's a whole series of cults that are utopian cults, where everybody just like sells their property and they all move in one spot. These are a little bit more benign, I think. There's one out east called Brook Farm. That was the one with like Nathaniel Hawthorne and Henry David Thoreau, and those guys all got together. But think about it. You're in the promised land. You can find the right way. You got all this land. We can perfect everything. So let's leave behind our own life and let's form this little commune. This little. Now you can see where this would lead to the rise of cults. Please.
Yeah, I looked up real quick about Jim Jones. He mixed Christianity with communism and utopianism.
Oh, okay.
It just had to be in class. I looked it up real quick. 'Cause I was curious. I didn't know.
Yeah. Does it have the name of his religion? Did it have a name?
Yes, People's Temple.
Oh, okay. Okay, People's Temple. Yeah, and do you see how, and again, what I want you to do is it's not any one of these things. It's not like you say availability of land. Well, because Australia has availability of land. You know, it's not a multi-ethnic community because you can go to other places and find a multi-ethnic community. It's all of these things together. Okay? Unique conditions. We're a nation of immigrants. We're going to give you 3 things here. Typical pattern. Since I took the time to write it out, I'm going to read it to you. Typical pattern. First generation sacrifices to make it in America, but clings to heritage in the midst of so much that is new. Does that sound like first generation immigrants? One of the things it's always struck me when Wisconsin became a state, equal number of the Declaration of Statehood, Proclamation of Statehood, were printed in German and printed in English. 1 in 2 Wisconsinites could not speak English. 1 out of every 2. You go and you look at an old church. What does it say above the church? Kirche. Why? Because you'd walk up there at St. Paul's, where I belonged in Appleton. St. Paul's Evangelische Kirche. Why? Because people couldn't speak English. They went there and they say, church? Well, I don't know what that is. I go to the Kirche. I should probably say that in German. Generation number 2 turns back on language and culture because they want to fit in America. I see that in my own family because my daughter-in-law is Hmong. She did not want to have a Hmong wedding. She only speaks English. She is all in America. Christy, you'd agree? Yeah. English is perfect. Probably better than her husband's, yeah, which is my son. Yeah. Why? Because they want to fit in. 3rd generation begins to recover some of that lost heritage. That's the story of immigration. 1st generation clings, 2nd generation reacts, 3rd generation synthesizes. Number 2, overemphasis on melting pot or cultural diversity misses the mark. Are we a melting pot? No. Not completely. You know that by traveling. Are there regional differences? Sure, of course there are. Are there differences if you would go to the Latino part of Green Bay, the Hmong part of Green Bay? Are there differences if you would go to, we'll leave it at that. Oh, if you go 25 miles that way up to Pulaski, I don't know, how far is Pulaski? Oh, good, because that was just a guess. Yeah. A melting pot is everybody is the same. Everybody is not the same. There are regional differences. There are cultural differences. There's differences how you feel about whether you should be alone with a female who is over the age of 13. We were talking about that. Again, this is a lot of Hmong culture thing. I had a Hmong student. She was 15, and she missed a ride. And the dad called and said, "Can you get a ride for Chua?" And I said, "Sure." And then a couple minutes later, he said, who was going to be driving her? And I said, well, I thought I would. And he said, okay, well, that would be okay. He said, but I don't want a man driving her. I said, like, Paul, what are you saying? And he said, well, I consider you part of the family. In that situation, there would be no other male faculty member that could drive his teenage daughter. Because he would say, why would a female be allowed alone with a male who is not related to her? I think so. I think it's very reasonable. Here's the other thing that misses the mark, though, and that is the idea of cultural diversity, that there is no mingling. That's a terrible idea because you are in a new area. The term I think that is most accurate is probably a cultural stew. It just doesn't sound as good as melting pot or cultural diversity. What is a stew? There's pieces of meat that are unique, right? A carrot is not the same as a piece of onion, and the meat is not the same as whatever else. But there is a sauce. There is a mingling. That's what America is. And finally, religious influences from around the globe. Constantly new influences. All the time. It used to be primarily between Catholics and Protestants. Now what we're trying to absorb is, in the 60s, 70s, it was forces from the East, Oriental. Now, of course, it's Islam. You have all of these new cultural impacts. It's swirling. It's different than it was 20 years ago, correct? Different than it was 50 years ago? Anybody want to comment on 75? I think so. 100? Think of how uniquely American that is. That you have huge chunks, not just for a while, because the whole world is becoming more cosmopolitan. We have been cosmopolitan since 1600. This is 4 centuries of, here come the Poles. Here come the Slavs. Here come the Jamaicans. Nation of immigrants is a prime factor for that development of cults. We'll go one more. Land of frontiers. Always a frontier. 2 things with this. Frontier, any of you remember watching Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone? Did you watch that TV show? I was such a little guy when that was on. And I would watch it. It must have been Saturday mornings because we had 4 channels. You had 1? So, yeah. No, TV, yeah, we're not going to go back that far. But what was the whole point? Davy Crockett, he would fix things on his own. Davy Crockett, he was always fighting off somebody. Who did he rely on? Davy Crockett. What did the people going out on the Oregon Trail, who did they rely on? Themselves. Think of how over and over and over again you have to rely on yourself. Your success is based on yourself. Now you start to see how this goes into there's a lot of land. Finally, optimism. Any problem can be solved if we examine it carefully. Uniquely American. I'll give you one other thing here, and then we'll close up. This individualism. I think this is a point that is worth considering, and that is that it's impacted even our literature. That American literature is very much self versus society. Think of Huckleberry Finn. Think of all those books that are me versus I'm here, I'm in rebellion. Instead, that isn't a particularly European idea. European is myself in society. Not how I'm opposed to it, but how do I function in the middle of it? Now start to think about how this relates to somebody who has visions of grandeur, somebody who wants to start a cult. It's like, I have land, so now we'll kind of sum everything up. I have land, I'm farther away, I'm tolerated, I can do it myself. All right, next time what we'll do is we're going to finish up real quickly with fear of the papacy and centralized authority. And then I'm going to give you the characteristics of cults. In other words, if you want to take a look at a cult, what is it that makes a cult and not a religion? You know, if we're going to talk about a religion, is one man's religion another man's cult? And also, what's the difference between a cult and the occult? So we'll finish it up next week, and this should give you a pretty broad understanding. We'll close with a blessing. Grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, love of God, and the fellowship of the Spirit be with us. Amen. Quick reminder, next week is the marathon. So you have one way in, one way out. Usually they're done by the time church is over, but you have only one way in.